Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is part 2 of our 3-part series on how to start, grow, and ultimately maintain a dominating law firm website. Today we're going to talk about the growth phase for bankruptcy attorneys. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available to replay online next week. And we also make the slides available, so there's no need to take notes unless you have a preference for doing so. We have a lot of ground to cover today. This webinar is scheduled to run for 2 hours, and the other webinars that we've done for practice areas have lasted between 2 hours and 2 hours and 10 minutes, just depending upon the pace and the questions. Now, we're not going to be able to stop to answer questions during the presentation, but if you are having technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar audio or video, please let us know through the chat area of the GoToWebinar control panel. We are going to have a questions and answers session at the end of this presentation, so if you do have questions along the way, please go ahead and add them to the questions area or send us a chat message and we'll address it at the end of the webinar. My name is Victoria Blute, and I'm the community manager here at Lawlytic. My passion is really for education. I love teaching attorneys about what works on the web and keeping them up to date on the latest in web technologies and trends. Now, if you've joined us for other webinars in this series, then you know that our CEO, attorney Dan Jaffe, normally introduces each of these webinars. However, he is away today, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in for him. But if you're not familiar with him, let me briefly introduce him to you. Before Dan became the full-time CEO of Lawlytic, he built 2 successful law firms in different states, in both Washington State and Arizona. And then he started a highly successful online legal directory that was later acquired by a large internet company. During Dan's years of practice, he himself will tell you that he made a lot of marketing investments and he also got badly burned several times. And what this led him to realize was that nobody was going to care about his practice like he did, and that in order for him to succeed, he needed to understand how the internet works, how potential clients were using the internet, and he needed to be in control of his marketing. So he did the heavy lifting of figuring this out early on, and that's how Lawlytic came into existence, to make it easy for attorneys to be in control of their marketing without wasting their time and their money. And today he loves showing his fellow attorneys how this stuff really works. If you attended the first webinar in this series, then you're already familiar with our presenters today. I'm going to reintroduce each of them to you now so we can jump from one presenter to the next without delay once we get started. Our first speaker today is Rachel Shalott. Rachel holds a JD and a master's and practiced criminal defense before joining Lawlytic. She is the vice president of content operations here, which means that she's in charge of all of our content operations, which produce millions of written words for our members' websites and blogs each year. In last month's webinar, Rachel demonstrated the basic building blocks of content to get law firms started in the right direction. Today, Rachel's going to build on that information and take you deeper into the strategy and the execution of growing a bankruptcy web presence. Next up, we have Sophia. Sophia Olaboni holds a master's degree in web design and is a design specialist here at Lawlytic. When new members sign up for our service, she and her team help them choose their design preferences based on proven designs that we know what works and also based on their goals. In last month's webinar, Sophia presented the basic considerations for starting a web presence. And today, Sophia's segment is going to take you deeper into design considerations that can influence the growth and effectiveness of your website. And then, of course, there's me. So I come from a journalism background. If you're a frequent reader of our blog, hopefully you're familiar with my work. In my last webinar, I went into great detail about how search engines work and about various types of content that lawyers should include when starting their bankruptcy website. Today, I'm going to explore how social media can work with your law firm's website to amplify your firm's signal, extend your reach, and reinforce your reputation. So before I turn the mic over to Rachel to talk a little bit about content, I want to briefly review who we are here at Lawlytic, what we do, and why it matters. So you have many choices of companies and technologies to design and build and host and help you market your law firm's website. And at Lawlytics, we do all of that, and we also have a lot of competition. So what is Lawlytics and how are we different? Our company is obsessed with the pursuit of the most efficient method of marketing for each law firm. And as we see it, there are two major variables of efficiency: time and money. Lawlytics was created to empower law firms to have unlimited marketing success without wasting either their time or their money. And we really have two different types of competitors. So on one side, we have full-service marketing companies. That includes companies like FindLaw and Martindale Nolo. And Lawlytics is built to give attorneys all of the upsides of using a full-service company without exposing you to the potential risks or downsides. And on the other side, you have do-it-yourself website software programs, things like WordPress or Wix. And these are generally cheap or free to use. And the problem is that these programs tend to come with steep opportunity costs, and attorneys often struggle to make them work, which unfortunately has them wasting their time and missing opportunities along the way. And while both full-service companies and do-it-yourself platforms are viable options, Lawlytics offers a more practical solution for lawyers. Our company works exclusively with lawyers, and our services are adaptable to every stage of a law firm's growth. Our members can start as small as they choose and grow as big as they decide without taking dangerous risks or committing to things that might not work. And our software was built exclusively for you, the attorney, so the learning curve is easy, and it enables our members to add to and edit their websites and turn their efforts into new business without struggling. So let's talk about metrics that matter for a minute. Here at Lawlytics, we tend to talk a little differently than most legal marketing companies. And that's because between the CEO of our company, who's an attorney, and our investors, there are more than 40 years of experience as lawyers in private practice, owning and managing their own law firms. So after Rachel and Sophia and I speak, I'm going to return to this slide in a minute. And at that time, I'm going to show you why the above measurements are really the only ones that matter when it comes to building your bankruptcy law website. There are a lot of law firm marketing vendors who trade in secret formulas and incantations and magic tricks and assorted forms of snake oil. And my presentation is going to focus on the things that you see listed in this slide. Our thesis here at Lawlytics is that all successful law firm marketing really begins and ends with these three key performance indicators. It's about making your marketing work, as I said, without wasting time or without wasting money. We want to encourage you to be a student of your own business and to be brutally honest with yourself and your staff about your marketing, and to insist that any marketing vendors that you engage with are brutally honest as well. So these three metrics really provide a true north. They speak clearly, they cut through the noise, and they cut through the distractions. And the signal that they provide can light the way for any law firm to grow and to meet even their biggest and most audacious goals. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Rachel for a moment, and she's going to talk to you about content and growing your bankruptcy law website. Rachel?
Thank you, Victoria. As you heard earlier, prior to joining Lawlytics, I practiced criminal defense in Pennsylvania, and I now oversee the Lawlytics content department. We work with our attorney clients to plan, create, and refine their web content. If you were with us in our START series of these webinars, one of the last things I spoke about was collecting data. I discussed tracking the types of clients your firm seems to naturally attract and the types of legal services that the majority of your clients were requesting, along with examining the larger trends in your geographic area or trends in policy or legislation which could affect your practice area. Now that we're entering the growth phase, it becomes time to act upon that data by allowing it to influence your marketing strategy in terms of custom tailoring your content to meet the areas where you're noticing the biggest need or the area upon which you feel that you can capitalize the most. And for firms who are in this situation, we really encourage you to allow that data to help guide your strategy, but not to be trigger happy. And what I mean by this is we've seen firms who maybe are getting a few cases in one vein and they focus extensively in one area, to the exclusion maybe of some other services they offer. And this leads to confusion on the part of visitors to their site. They may think that they only take one particular type of case, or they only specialize in one area and don't provide services in other area, or don't focus in other areas. We are going to be talking about creating multiple websites when you have something you'd like to highlight in particular in just a few moments. But right now, let's focus on taking what you've learned and starting to grow your online presence. When you set out to grow your site, we generally advise the vast majority of firms to allocate their efforts in the following ways. First and foremost is to create a critical mass of substantive content for your site. And what I mean by this is continuously adding evergreen pages to your site in order to achieve a desired site size. Now, this desired size will depend on your practice area, your geographic location, and what your competitors are doing. To give an example, a dominating criminal defense firm in Los Angeles, California, we see sizes of about 900 to 1,100 pages, while a site that might dominate divorce in Des Moines, Iowa, might be closer to 100 pages. Now, again, it depends on your market and it depends on what your competitors are doing, but we've been conducting market research for the past couple of years, and the one consistent we've always seen is that naturally high-performing sites have a high volume of pages for that practice area. Number 2 is blogging. Blogging consistently will definitely benefit your site. We recommend that you do try to blog regularly, but don't make blogging a primary focus of your efforts until you've grown your site to a substantial size. So let's say that you do set a goal for yourself in terms of a number of pages that you'd like to see your site achieve. What we recommend doing is if you're at less than maybe 20 to 30% of this size, blogging really should be secondary. It should be something that you try to do maybe once per week or a few times a month. Once you've reached a benchmark, you might want to shift that focus. So you're blogging a little bit more frequently, you're engaged in more sophisticated blogging techniques that I'll talk about in a little bit. However, we do always caution that there isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy for growth. So, for example, if there are current event developments that are happening that are really high profile, so on something that's happening on a national scale, something that people are very, very connected to, and they're reading about it, they're consuming information. A good example I would give now would be if you were engaged in the practice of immigration law, because we are seeing policies change in this field on a day-to-day basis from the past couple of weeks. If you're seeing something like this happen, then it might be an indication that you should pivot and focus on blogging a little bit more heavily, especially if you have sort of a well-developed social media presence and you're sharing things and they're connected to what you're saying. You are an authority in your practice area and they're interested to see what your opinion might be about a particular strategy or a change in the law or a proposed piece of legislation. They're interested in consuming, your opinion. So when something like this does happen and it becomes sort of a hot area, we do recommend to sort of shifting over and focusing a little bit heavier in this area. And that brings me to a third area of concern, which is sharing your content. Your primary focus should be on content creation, but you also do want to get your content out to the public. So Victoria will be speaking about implementing a common sense social media strategy later in the webinar. So I'm going to leave those details up to her. Finally, and generally in most cases, doesn't need to be the primary focus, but it should be something you keep on your radar, and that's online reputation management. In the grow phase, you're going to be hearing from satisfied clients, you're going to be seeking reviews for your site. You'll probably find that a lot of people are going to third-party sites and reviewing your firm. It's a good idea to sort of perform an audit occasionally. See what comes up in search engines under the name of your firm or under the name of particular attorneys. Just kind of see what your online presence would look to a potential client. And later in the webinar, Victoria is going to go into greater detail about specific tools that attorneys can use to manage their online reputation. So for now, I'd really like to focus on these first two elements, creating a critical mass of substantive content for your site and blogging. So first off, I'm going to talk about the evergreen pages on your site, the practice area pages. Like I mentioned before, reaching a critical mass with these pages is key. And the fastest way you will get to this critical mass is by adding to your site these evergreen pages. So you're going to be covering topics related to your practice area. When we discussed substantive pages in the start section of the webinars, our main focus was on creating a few broad overview pages. And our goal at this point was to adequately describe the legal services that your firm provides and give a general overview of the legal principles that will be involved, so someone who isn't familiar with a particular service can walk away with a general understanding of what they would face if they were in the shoes of a client. However, when we're in the grow phase, we're focusing really heavily on fleshing these pages out. We want to get more and more detailed. Our approach is somewhat akin to the structure of a tree. We're going to be adding branches that are eventually getting smaller and smaller and more numerous as we go. So first, we make sure we have the most broad categories covered. We make sure we have a page written for each service or cluster of services. And we include these either in the main navigation of the site or in a primary dropdown. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take the pages we've written and add what we call child pages underneath them. So if we're starting with a few pages on the different types of bankruptcy, what we're going to do is go into each type really in detail. We're going to talk about the parties who are going to be involved. We're going to talk about the terms that someone who's going through a bankruptcy, who may not be familiar with, how they're going to be referred to, how creditors will be referred to, this type of thing. Who's eligible for this? What will this do to someone's credit? What's going to happen to my property? What's going to happen to my possessions? What does the phrase "no assets" mean? What is the difference between different types of bankruptcy? What might be the best avenue for me and my spouse to pursue? So again, what we're doing is we're going to retain the original page that we wrote that's more general. Maybe some of these elements we're seeing here, these smaller pages, were subheadings in our first one. We're going to build upon that. We're going to expand this, and we're going to get much more detailed. Another thing we're going to do is get more detailed with our FAQ pages. When we aim to launch a site, what we want to do is we want to have at least one FAQ page, and that page should answer questions that a potential client might have about the services that your firm provides and about the firm itself. So things like, how quickly can I expect a response if I call your firm? But as we're growing, we're going to be adding more FAQ pages, and these FAQ pages are going to be more detailed. So as you can see here, we now have an FAQ page that will relate specifically only to questions related to Chapter 7. So that's not going to talk about general information about the firm. It's going to be much more detailed and much more specific, and we'll be adding more of those as we go. Again, as we're growing, the goal is to become more and more detailed. And another important aspect you want to focus on when you're growing your site, local pages and resource pages. Victoria covered local pages in depth during the Start series of these webinars. But just to recap, a local page is one that gives your potential clients relevant information that they might need, such as a page that discusses where a court is located and where you might pay your fines, that type of thing. Resource pages provide information for local, usually non-legal organizations that provide services your potential clients might be interested in. So these pages could include things such as credit counseling for veterans, free lectures on financial management at a local library, etc. Having these pages will serve a number of purposes. It will, of course, provide relevant information to a potential client base, but it's also going to add to the credibility of your site as an authority with the search engines. And when you're practicing in any type of area that deals with federal law, when you're practicing in any type of area that has similarities across geographic regions. So what I mean by that is bankruptcy is going to be called the same thing in every single state, in every single jurisdiction, in the country. So it's very, very important that you include local geographic information so that people who are searching in your area are able to find you and able to find your firm. Because even though there might be elements of a particular legal service, there might be that are federal, and so things are the same. Generally, that's not how people search. They don't really know that. They're just going to search for, what should I do if I need to file bankruptcy in Cleveland, Ohio? So having local information is really important to making sure that the people who need the information that you're providing are able to get it. And this can also be a jumping off point for forming or showcasing connections that you have with local organizations. So we've worked with a lot of really successful firms who they have connections in the local community. For example, they might volunteer to help, at the local I talked about, you might showcase where there's a free lecture on financial management. Well, sometimes attorneys or staff members from the firm work with these organizations. They might be the one who's giving the lecture. And so having this information on your site, it showcases that you're involved in the community and you truly care about what people who are in the shoes of a potential client are going through. So as you're growing your site and you're adding practice area pages, don't forget to provide this type of local information, as well as showcasing any relationships you might have with community organizations. And next I want to discuss blogging. When you're just starting out, it is important to blog, although it shouldn't be the main focus of your content creation. At the beginning, you'll want to periodically write blog articles that highlight important developments in your practice area, or developments in current events that might be of interest to your target audience. You'll want to come up with a frequency you can maintain at this point, be it once or twice a week, or say 10 times a month. And like I said earlier, once you've reached a certain point in your evergreen build, you can shift to a more sophisticated blogging strategy. And what I mean by this is taking some time to predict and analyze what topics you should be writing about and when. One thing we recommend is creating blog series. So that's when you're covering related information over a number of posts that span maybe a few weeks or even a few months. And this will be done at a strategic time when the information has the best chance to reach the audience. And there are some tools at your disposal that can be of assistance when planning a blog series, and also coming up with a general schedule for when you're going to blog around particular topics. One of these is Google Trends. With Google Trends, you can view how users seek information over time in a particular region related to a particular topic. So on my slide here in the graph to the right, I've pulled data on the search term Chapter 7 Bankruptcy in Chicago, Illinois. So what we can do is we get the 5-year history of people searching for this particular phrase. And then we can kind of look at the patterns. If there is a spike in popularity during a particular time each year, what we can do is we can take that information and we can plan our blogging strategically around that to capture when it seems like there will be a high volume of search activity during this time. So we've seen many firms really take off and really grow their sites and then in turn really grow their practices. But we've also seen some who are in this phase hit some stumbling blocks. And I just wanted to take a moment to discuss the mistakes we've seen when firms are attempting to grow their online presence. And the first is a disorganized approach. So this is something we commonly encounter with firms where there are more than one author, although it can happen when just one person is writing for the site as well. This is something I spoke at length about in our Start series. But when you have multiple authors, and I don't mean multiple authors at the time you're launching the site, but you could have multiple authors in the future when you take on partners or associates or you have law students who write for your site. It's really critical that you establish guidelines that govern the tone, the voice, and the structure of the pages on your site. Because when this is skipped, what we've seen is there's some inconsistencies that can make the navigation experience very confusing for the potential client, for the visitor to your site. For example, we might have different authors who craft a call to action differently. So the message that appears in the end of the page might say something like, "We are your Pittsburgh bankruptcy attorneys." While another page might say, "We are your Western Pennsylvania bankruptcy attorneys serving Erie, Butler, and Pittsburgh." Again, this could be confusing to a potential client. They could maybe interpret this as, "Oh, well, if I want to do this particular type of bankruptcy, I think that's limited to Pittsburgh. So I'm up in Erie, they wouldn't be able to help. But if I wanted this other kind, I think they do everywhere." But, again, it creates confusion, and it can be that inconsistency can drive potential business from your site. In a few minutes, Sophia is going to be talking about why it's really important to keep your design consistent. You're going to want your logo and your colors to kind of appear the same way if they're on your website or they're on a promotional pen that you're giving out or they're up on a billboard. And just as you want the elements of your design to remain consistent, you also want your voice and your structure to be consistent across the different pages in your website. Similar to this is kind of having a lack of strategy. And that can happen even with just one author. Say you're not sure when you're going to have time to write for your site. So every now and again when you have that free hour, you sit down, you just sort of pick out a topic and you bang out a page. You will be adding to the overall volume and authority of your site, but you're really missing out on an opportunity to concentrate your efforts in an area where you think you can get the most business or where you can give your website a really concentrated boost. Next, we've seen some firms working with SEO companies, and the results, there's a range. We've seen some beneficial results, but we've seen a lot more pretty negative outcomes in this area. SEO companies are everywhere. It's something I'm sure you're well aware of because they really love nothing more than inundating attorneys with really scary sounding reports about their website performance. However, it's really important to be aware of the fact that there's no regulatory body that governs SEO companies. Before we were admitted to practice law, we had to sit for the MPRE. We had to have our character and fitness examined because we are all subject to a governing body. And the purpose of that governing body is to make sure that we are always working in the best interest of our clients. And we have rules that govern our professional conduct. Again, the whole purpose of all of this is to make sure that we are always working in our client's best interest. There is no governing body for SEO companies. There is no higher authority that's making sure that the SEO companies are working in the best interests of their clients. And as a result of that, what we see is they are not working in the best interests of their clients. Sometimes the mistakes are more innocent. This can happen when an SEO company is just ignorant of the rules that govern attorneys' behavior online, what they can and can't do when they're engaged in advertising practices. Sometimes they're more almost directly malicious. We've seen SEO companies that add certain links in attorneys' sites that go to maybe a directory to promote other attorneys that the SEO company works for. Again, there are many different SEO companies out there. There are many different ranges of practices, but we've seen some pretty scary things happen with some clients who've worked with SEO companies. Some of these are relatively minor. We've seen sites that are just filled. They get filled with keyword stuffed content, and as a result, the URL is penalized. It's going to take a hit with Google. And when we see this happen, it generally takes months of adding good organic content for the URL to recover. But we've also seen much more serious consequences. For example, we've seen SEO companies that write content for attorneys that miss really, really important elements of being in adhering to the professional rules. For example, some states require you to have a disclaimer at the end of every page of a website, and we've seen that be skipped. I've included in this slide to the right, this is a modified version of an actual screenshot of something we came across. It was an SEO company who created fake attorney blogs. They would take Shutterstock images and create fake names and fake backgrounds for fake attorneys, and they would put up these blogs for the purpose of promoting the content of firms that they were working for. And when we found this one, the state that the firm practices in specifically prohibits any advertising activities with individuals purporting to be attorneys who have not been admitted to practice law. So again, if you're not in control or you're not aware what these companies are doing on your behalf, you could really be putting your firm at risk. So if this is something you want to do, make sure you know what's going on. Make sure you know what's being written and associated with your name, with the names of attorneys at your firm, and make sure you know what activities these SEO companies are taking on your behalf if they're doing things in areas elsewhere on the internet, not directly on your website. It's just an area in which you absolutely need to be prudent, because the risks are totally not worth, the slight benefit you might get when things like this are being done. So next, multiple websites. There might be a time when maintaining multiple sites actually is a good idea. However, we've seen firms who think what they're kind of trying to do is, if they saturate the market with sites for their firm, they'll gain some type of an advantage. But oftentimes this isn't what happens. If sites both are focusing on same geographic area, promoting the same services by the same firm, many times what they end up doing is just competing against each other. And the result is both sites are pushing each other down. So you're actually hurting yourself in search results. And then finally, we have unrealistic expectations. Like I mentioned earlier, the top criminal defense firm in Los Angeles is going to have a site that might have about 1,000 pages on it. A top divorce firm in a rural area might have a site that has about 50 pages on it. However, if you think you're going to walk into Los Angeles and dominate the market by organic content marketing and writing 50 pages, you might be in for a rude awakening. What we see all too often is attorneys who have unrealistic expectations, and when this happens, they become prime prey to kind of falling into this trap of changing market strategies too often without really committing to a content strategy long enough to let it work. Victoria is going to be talking in greater detail about why consistency in your marketing strategy is key. And we've also worked with some firms who have been very successful, and we've seen some common patterns taken by attorneys and firms who really do go on to dominate their area. And chief among these are they have a really organized, strategic approach to adding content to their site. They know what they want to target first. They know who's going to write what. They know when things are going to be written, when things are going to be published. They spread their content out so that the site is getting a continuous boost of new content. They plan for eventualities, such as coming up with a backup during a time where they know they'll be really busy and they're not going to be able to write for their site. And then secondly, employing the strategy of multiple websites when it is warranted. Like I said earlier, we don't want sites that compete against each other, but if you have a particular element or a particular service area of your firm you'd like to highlight, creating multiple sites can be an effective way to achieve this. So, for example, if you practice in a town that's really, really close to, let's say, a military base, and you have an associate who is a veteran, and you want to take out a second site that really focuses on how you have an attorney on your staff who understands the common struggles that people face when they're when they're still serving, as they're transitioning into citizen life, and you just think it's a unique element of your firm that, some of your competitors, they don't have that. They're not able to showcase that. And it's something unique. So you think that you have a particular segment of your audience that having this, showcasing this, whatever your unique element is, it's really going to resonate with a large chunk of your potential audience. And it's something that is unique, and by creating an additional site, what you can do is you can really focus on whatever that is. In this case, it's our associate attorney who happens to be a veteran. You can really, really put that person at the forefront of your second site and focus on a particular section of a target audience. Again, when this is being done, you might be trying to focus on the same geographic area, but you're also highlighting something that's very unique, and it's different from maybe the umbrella of services that all the other associates at your firm provide. You're focusing on maybe one or two, or you're focusing on one associate. So it's different. You're promoting different things, and you won't see that competition that we see when we're just trying to promote the same firm, the same area, the same services. A lot of times we've seen firms do this, and it's very, very effective. And next is having realistic expectations. And what I mean here is just basically the inverse of what I spoke about earlier with unrealistic expectations. Firms who know that organic content marketing works, but it requires a certain amount of effort and a certain amount of time, and they really stick with their strategy, they are much more likely to see it successfully come to fruition than those who are sort of changing tactics every 6 months. Because that leapfrogging back and forth, it's not giving you enough time. It's not giving your site enough time to commit to one consistent strategy. So we see people who stick with it for the long haul tend to be much more successful. And then finally, firms who are very successful, they capitalize upon their unique selling proposition. Might be something that from the start. This particular element of your firm is what you want to highlight. Or it might be something that evolves over time. You never know what might strike a chord with your local audience. It might be the logo you chose. It might be a particular page that you have, a local page that gives detailed information that consumers can't find elsewhere on the web. It might be a video that a law student extern made for you one summer. So it's always important to have your finger on the pulse of what is resonating with your potential clients and to really be able to capitalize upon that. If you have more specific questions regarding content for your site, I really encourage you to shoot us an email at writing@lawlytics.com. Some of you might already be familiar with her, but Alyssa Rhodes is the director of our content services, and over the past couple years, she's helped many, many attorneys plan and create their content. So if you have a brief question, you want some additional resources, or some assistance planning for the long term, we're more than happy to help. So you can give us a call or shoot us an email. And finally, I just wanted to speak briefly about the next webinar in our practice area series, and that's going to be Dominate. And our bankruptcy session will air on March 21st, and it's going to be available on demand after that air date. In this webinar, I'm going to be discussing adding various types of downloadable collateral to your site, expanding the scope of your practice area, and we're going to examine some lessons we've learned from really dominant firms, as well as some pitfalls that you might want to avoid. So if you're interested in taking that next step, I highly encourage you to join us on March 16th or to check the webinar out on demand after that air date. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Sophia.
Thank you, Rachel. In the first part of this series, I discussed the various basic elements that make for a strong law firm website and what can take away from user experience and keep potential clients from contacting your firm. In the second part of this series, I'm going to dig deeper into the elements of design that can have a psychological effect on your potential clients and encourage them to engage with you. We'll discuss topics like choosing colors, what they mean and what they can say about your firm, the various shape of logos and how that can affect a potential client's perception of your firm. And I'll make a case for the importance of a responsive website. And I'll also discuss examples of how to make the content on your site more readable, which can increase client engagement. If you missed the first part in our Start, Grow, and Dominate series, please feel free to visit the Lawlytics website and check out our webinar page and see my design tips from part 1. So let's get started. In the first part of our series, we discussed what makes a good logo. Now we're going to dig a little deeper to discuss the psychology of shapes. So let's start off by talking about circles, ovals, and ellipses. These shapes tend to project a positive emotional message, and as a result, they're one of the most commonly used graphical shapes. Nature holds some of the first sets of circles that a person sees, like the sun, the moon, stars, the earth, some fruits, and the iris of a human's eye. Circular logos can suggest defense, endurance, community, friendship, safety, love, and relationships. Circles have no beginning or end, which suggest things like energy and power. Rings have an implication of marriage or partnership, suggesting stability and endurance. Many companies that have a global presence, unparalleled products or service, that value community and contributions, or have been around to stand the test of time use circular logos. And some examples of those companies would include ABC, Target, Starbucks, and NASA. So now let's talk about squares. Squares and rectangles suggest stability, but can also be used to show balance. The straight lines of a square or rectangle would suggest organization, strength, intellect, structure, and efficiency. Squares are mostly found in man-made structures, and as a result, they have become a familiar shape that we as people trust. For example, items of furniture like chairs or tables are often squares or rectangles. It should also be noted that when combined with colors like blue, or gray, squares can appear cold and uninviting. And we'll talk a little bit more about colors later. But a good way to counteract that is to position a square in an unconventional way or add a more dynamic color to it. When you do this, you can create something more interesting than just a basic square. Companies that want to inspire stability and strength often have a square-shaped logo. Examples of those companies would be H&R Block, Home Depot, Microsoft, Goodwill, GM, Gap, Lego, and Elle. So now let's discuss triangles. Triangles are sometimes associated with power, science, religion, and law. Triangles can be positioned upright on their sides, and that positioning can create, positioning can create different meanings. When it's sitting on its base, triangles can be perceived as to promote stability. On their sides, triangles can suggest energy, purpose, and progression. A triangle on its side can also represent direction, movement, or speed because it looks like an arrow. Some examples of logos that feature triangles would be Delta, Mitsubishi, and Google Play. So we've talked about basic shapes, but what about lines? Our minds may associate vertical lines or shapes with strength and aggression, courage, and boldness. The precision of vertical lines can also suggest professionalism. Horizontal lines and shapes, on the other hand, can suggest community, tranquility, calm, and peace. Jagged or sharp angles may appear as aggressive or dynamic. They are associated with violence, action, and speed. On the other hand, if you were to go with a soft or rounded letter or shape, that will give a youthful appeal. Curved shapes can suggest motion, happiness, rhythm, pleasure, and generosity. So now that we've talked about logo shapes, let's talk about another component of your logo, as well as in other parts of your design, which would be your color. Color is extremely important in branding. When someone looks at a logo, the color is the foremost thing that they will remember. In fact, according to Color Matters, 80% of visual information that we take in is related to color. So it is very important to think about the colors that you are going to be using in your logo and elsewhere on your website. Many brands have sets of colors trademarked for protection against other brands in the same market. So for instance, Coca-Cola has this iconic red and white scheme protected. These brands try to associate themselves with the color at a fundamental level. So when you hear the names of these brands, it should be easy to think of its color. And one really good example of that would be McDonald's. When you hear McDonald's, you might think of the immediate colors of red and yellow, or you might even visually see the golden arch. Or even UPS, how they associated the words dependable to their brand from the meaning of the main color that they use, which is brown. So let's talk about individual colors and the effect that they can have on your potential clients. So now we're going to start with red. And we're going to start with red because red is a very popular color. Red quickly catches people's attention. One likely reason is that it's used for things like stop signs. But the most popular sentiment linked to red is love, but it also signifies passion and energy. The sight of this color and its alternative shapes make people feel alive. Red can heighten hunger, and it can be inviting at the same time. Therefore, it's often used for food establishments like restaurants and diners. Red can also symbolize power, which is why it's a common color for fictitious heroes and villains like Superman or Iron Man. Other meanings for red include ambition, aggression, power, success, as well as strength, victory, and warmth. If you're thinking about alternatives to red, try maybe carmine, crimson, ruby, scarlet, or vermilion. There are, of course, brands that we think about when we think about red, and those brands would be, of course, Coca-Cola, Virgin, and Target. just to name a few. So now we're going to talk about orange. Orange is a color that's easily liked by children because of its warmth. Since it shares its name with a fruit, it's often associated with foods or beverages. Orange also symbolizes luxury and playfulness. Orange isn't as aggressive as red, but it can have the same stimulating effects to the human brain. Orange can symbolize endurance, action, assurance, change, communication, creativity, enthusiasm, health, security, and wisdom, among a lot of other meanings. Alternatives to true orange would be apricot, carrot, peach, or tangerine. Brands that have been popularized by this color would be Nickelodeon, Fanta, Blogger, and Golf. So now we're going to go into yellow. Yellow is believed to be the color of hope, and it's also associated with optimism and youthfulness. Since many of us were taught that this is the color of the sun, we associate it with bright days, which make people feel happy. It may not be a coincidence that highlighters, pens, pencils, and legal pads are yellow, because yellow is considered to improve memory and focus. Yellow can also represent forgiveness, joy, intelligence, youth, and knowledge. If you're thinking about using yellow in a logo, you can also consider some alternatives to true yellow like canary or goldenrod, lemon, and mustard. Brands that have used this iconic color would be Crayola, McDonald's, National Geographic, Post-it, and Subway. So now we'll talk about green. Green is widely identified as the color of life by many people. Green is sometimes favored by those who want to inspire health and growth in the environment. And green, of course, is also the color of American money, and therefore it can be associated with wealth, especially if it's partnered with a color like gold. Green is also associated with concepts like adventure, calmness, cleanliness, efficiency, freedom, generosity, growth, health, hope, progress, safety, and sympathy. Alternatives to green would be asparagus, forest green, lime green, sea green, olive green, hunter. Popular brands that use this color would be Animal Planet, Android, Heineken, Land Rover, and Starbucks. Now we'll dive into a very popular color. So blue is popular color in general, but blue is also sometimes seen as a popular choice for social networking sites like Facebook or Twitter. This is because blue can signify relaxation and communication, effects that are sometimes achieved when socializing online. It is also a color associated with trust, and this encourages people to share almost anything in their social media accounts. Since seas and clear skies are often blue, the color is easily related to rest, which makes it an easy choice for those who wish to invoke loosening up. Blue can also represent loyalty, honesty, dignity, and reliability, among other things. Alternatives to blue would be cerulean, turquoise, or teal. Popular brands that use this color would be Dell, Facebook, Intel, Tumblr, and Twitter. Now we'll move to purple. Purple often reflects luxury. Many products choose purple to indicate lavishness. However, too much purple can come off as tacky, so exercise some restraint when you're using this color. Purple can also be associated with intelligence, independence, and mystery. Since not many natural things are this color, it can communicate excitement. Purple can represent things like intelligence, independence, as well as value, wisdom, and justice. Alternatives to purple would be violet, amethyst, lavender, lilac, and plum. Brands popularized by this color would be Cadbury, Hallmark, Crown Royal, Welch's, and Yahoo. So now we'll go into an earthy color, brown. This color of the earth signifies reliability, stability, and humility. Brown is considered as natural as green, which makes sense because they're often seen together in many living things like plants and trees. Brown signifies prudence. Brown isn't flashy or attention-grabbing, and it really doesn't need to be. It's a color that feels grounded. It can represent things like steadfastness, simplicity, friendliness, dependability, and health. Alternatives to brown would be bronze, chestnut, mahogany, and taupe. Brands popularized by this color would be M&M's, Louis Vuitton, and yes, of course, UPS. So now that we've discussed the different meaning behind shapes and the different meanings behind colors, this would be a good time to take a look at your branding and decide if it is representing your firm in the best way and if you're coming across with the right meanings to your target audience. So now I'm going to make a case for the importance of a responsive website. If you spend some time thinking about your online legal marketing, you may have heard the term responsive design come up. So what exactly is a responsive website? A responsive website is a site that responds or changes based on the device that it's being viewed on. For example, if your law firm's website has a 3-column layout on a desktop or a laptop, then on tablet or a mobile device, it may change to a single-column display. Responsive design may also hide things like unnecessary images so that they don't interfere or compete with more important information when the site is being viewed from a mobile device. Responsive sites not only have dynamic content that changes based on the screen size and condensed navigation, it also features optimized images and correct padding and spacing. If you're wondering whether your site is responsive, and yes, if you're a Lawlytic member, your site is 100% responsive. But here's a good way that you can check. If you're on the computer, you can tell if your site is responsive by reducing your browser's window size from full screen down to the smallest size. If the appearance of the text, the images, the menus change to accommodate that smaller window, then the site is most likely responsive. So now, what is the difference between a responsive website and a mobile-friendly one? One way to think about this is to remember that responsive website is mobile-friendly, but not all mobile-friendly sites are responsive. And here's why. While a responsive website is one that is originally designed to accommodate a variety of screen sizes and devices, a mobile-friendly website is one that is designed to work exactly the same across all devices. This means that nothing about the site changes, whether you're using it on a desktop, laptop, tablet, or smartphone. The website is simply made a little smaller, or it shrinks basically, so that you can see it on the device, but features are hard to use and it may be too heavy for mobile. So users may have to enlarge the text to be able to read it. They may have to scroll from left to right to see the full panel where the content sits. They might have difficulty using your menu because it's a full width menu, and they might get frustrated. It's an important thing to distinguish between. If your site is mobile friendly but not responsive, you may have already frustrated your users. Stats tell us that it is likely that your next potential client will visit your website from a mobile device. And as I explained in the first part of this series, a user's first line of defense when encountering a site that's hard to use is to leave. So this is something very important for attorneys to think about. It is no longer enough to have a mobile-friendly website. It is dire that your site is 100% responsive. So now we'll discuss slimming down your law firm's website. As I mentioned in the first part of this series, there are some attorneys who really want to add every bell and whistle to their websites. And I can understand why that's appealing. There are some features that just look really cool and interesting, or maybe you've seen a competitor who has something similar. But bells and whistles create some real problems, not only from a design perspective, but also for your potential clients. In this next section, we're going to talk about slimming and refining what's on your website to give your users an optimal experience that encourages them to engage with your content and to also contact your firm. So a lot of the bells and the whistles that attorneys want to put on their law firm's website have a couple of problems. They don't serve any real purpose for the potential client. They may confuse the client by creating a lack of direction. And they weigh down a site because they tend to be rather heavy elements. When you're thinking about your web design, keep this in mind. Everything you put on your website has to have a function and a purpose. Be selective about the things that you put on your website. You may want to do an audit of your current site and ask yourself, what value does this element add to my visitor's experience? What benefit does it offer them? If the answer is nothing, then don't use the item. There's a lot of debate among web developers about the use of sliders. Sliding images on your home page can help you communicate several important messages in a small space. The problem is that most visitors don't wait around for the third or fourth slide. They start scrolling and then the sliding images just become a distraction at that point. One thing we sometimes notice is that attorneys often ask if they should have a slider on their website. They may have seen sliders on another website that they really like the style and they want to use it too. But the answer to whether or not you should have a slider is it depends. And here is what it depends on. If you don't have a lot of content on your website anyways, a slider can act like an unnecessary element. It can distract your potential clients from what you want them to read or where you want them to go. If there's not enough content there, sliders can even bore your potential clients, and then they just become a useless element. However, if you have a lot of strong content that you want to drive traffic to, a slider may be a good choice. A combination of strong image that supports and strengthens your message alongside some high-quality content can keep your potential client engaged. And if the content is strong and interesting, that can be enough to keep them focused on a slider. But the bottom line is you shouldn't have a slider for the sake of having a slider. And you shouldn't use images for the sake of having them either. Be strategic about what you do and what you choose to put on your website because everything you do does matter. So now we're going to discuss how you can increase readability on your site. Readability is an important part of your site's refinement. It's something that I discussed a little bit during the first part of the series, but I bring it up again because it's a valuable thing for attorneys to understand. And here are some elements that increase readability for your website's content. First, you should choose your font wisely. On the slide that I have here, I have 4 examples of primary fonts. The first in black would be a serif font. So the serif font, something like Times New Roman, Rockwell, or Baskerville, has the little feet on the top and the bottom of the letters. This type of font typeface is considered traditional and serious. And so a lot of attorneys tend to gravitate towards a serif-based font. The next choice would be the sans serif font in red. Now, sans serif fonts are similar to the serif fonts except they don't have the little feet. And these types of fonts are considered more modern. And they would be fonts like Helvetica, Century Gothic, just different fonts like that. But beyond being considered modern, these fonts are easier to read on the web. And so whenever an attorney likes a serif font, I always suggest that they only use it for headlines and that they use sans serif fonts for their content, the body of their content, because it is easier on the reader's eyes. It is easier to read on a mobile device. And so if you're going to use a serif font because you want to appear serious, just do it strategically and think about the user in the end and not necessarily what you particularly like. And then the other 2 fonts are script and display. Now, these ones often look very interesting, but they can be challenging to read, and they can also give off the wrong sort of impression of your firm because they could seem a little too playful and kiddish at times. So for that reason, we recommend that These types of fonts are used sparingly, if not at all. Another thing that you could do is to create use high contrast colors on your site. So making sure that you're highlighting different sections, maybe with a color, or making sure that you're not using a background color because you just want to make your site jazzy, but that background color might make it hard for the text on top of it to be read. So don't sacrifice readability for a design perspective, because if your content can't be read, then your site almost serves no purpose. And people scan text for the information that they need, which is why shorter lines of paragraphs can help them find that information quicker. So it is very helpful if you cut up your content into what I like to call bite-sized pieces that is easily digestible by your clients. So it's an effect called chunking. And what you're going to do is you're going to create a chunk of text that's going to have a bold, easy to read headline, preferably not too long. You don't want like a 3-4 line headline. So you have a bolded headline, you have a chunk of content, and you have little bullet points or numbered lists that kind of pull out information that you want them to easily read. And so it kind of creates a hierarchy. And for the people who scan, which is pretty much everyone, they could easily look at the title to see if the title is exactly what if it's exactly what they're looking for, and they know that everything underneath it is going to be related to said title. So chunking out your content, making the lines shorter, making your paragraphs shorter, and just creating little blocks of content with little headlines that describe what the section is about is going to increase your readability a lot. And it's going to make it easier for people to scan your site and easily digest the information on there. Next, we will discuss the role of site speed. So site speed is one of those things that attorneys sometimes obsess over without fully understanding it and the role that it plays in their web presence. Is site speed important to your online presence? Yes. A site that takes too long to load will frustrate your potential clients, and they'll go elsewhere to find the answers to their questions. And we know that Google is concerned about user experience, and part of that experience is whether the page information loads quickly enough for someone who wants to find it. Search engines also need to crawl and digest information on websites quickly, and slow sites can hurt this process. But in the grand scheme of things, site speed is one of the hundreds of signals that Google uses to determine rank and relevancy. But the real issue here is that a slow site can frustrate an otherwise enthusiastic potential client who, in being frustrated, is likely to leave your site and go elsewhere, maybe even to a competitor's site and hire them instead of you. That's why it's valuable to remove any unnecessary heavy elements that can cause your site to load more slowly. So let me also say that some attorneys become a little too concerned when they have a site that doesn't measure 100 out of 100 for site speed. So let me explain why a perfect site speed score doesn't always translate to a good website. First, if I was to create a website that is simply a blank page, that site might actually score perfectly according to a site speed calculator. And the problem is that the site has nothing on it. And as soon as you begin to add elements to the site, you might see the site speed start to decrease a bit. But if you start adding a lot of unnecessary heavy items, that's when you'll see the speed decrease by a lot. So at the far end of the spectrum, you have a blank page, which would rank well for site speed, and on the other end you have a site with every single last bell and whistle, but it is slow and it has terrible site speed score. So the deal here is balance. Having all of the necessary elements that drive traffic and engagement, and removing the bells and whistles that can distract and can take away from your overall presence is what you want to achieve. So now we're going to discuss social media from a design perspective. Your law firm's social media presence can affect how your brand performs if it's not consistent with the rest of the online web presence that you have. And the goal here is to have more people contact your law firm. Take a look. The look of your brand is determined by your logo, your layout, colors, and other design elements. The visual identity of your brand can be affected by how these elements work. When it's done right, your bankruptcy law practice can create a visually stunning page that reflects your brand's personality and message effectively. So some guidelines to keep in mind when it comes to visual branding is 1, keep colors, logos, and layouts similar across all platforms. So that means that your website, all of your individual social media sites, if you have a blog site, an individual blog site, all of that should look the same. It should have the same branding across all of it. Because again, people expect consistency in something that they recognize. Your official website, emails, newsletters, business cards, promotional items, anything printed with your branding should have the similar design that you have on your social media platform. So once again, creating a really good branding package, good color scheme, and having a versatile logo from the start is going to be a key factor here, and it's going to make a lot of these other elements a little bit easier. So as you're looking at your branding, as you're thinking about growing your law firm and playing a more prominent role, look at your branding and make sure that it, 1, speaks true to your firm and the message that you want to present, and 2, make sure that everywhere that it is represented, it is consistent. And then last thing is to use similar tone and language in your content. So in the end, keep your message content consistent. Rachel talked about this a little bit in the first part of this series, but conflicting messages or conflicting tone can confuse your potential clients. It may harm your brand. So it's important to keep your content consistent, whether it's on your substantive pages of your site, your blog posts, or your social media updates. Bombarding your audience with content, especially if it's the same again and again, can be a problem. So keep the pace a bit varied. Twitter users and Facebook users may expect very different posting frequencies from a business. And that is true with any social media platform. And so really pay attention to the platforms that you are using and see what is a good varying pace and try to keep up with that so that you don't tire or annoy your potential clients. And as I mentioned in the first part of this series, people don't like being constantly advertised to. So taking the call my firm now approach can really turn people away from doing just that. So use your social media as a tool to promote content that gives your potential clients something to think about. Surprise them with facts that they didn't know. Give them valuable information that they can use. Think about creating infographics that are highly shareable. When you do that, you're much more likely to see your content shared by others, which, again, helps to drive traffic back to your site. And now that I've finished talking about social media from a design perspective, Victoria is going to tell you a little bit more about social media from a strategy standpoint.
Thanks, Sophia. So here's what I'm going to be discussing with you today in terms of web strategy, social media. So some of you may be asking why the topic of social media wasn't introduced in the first part of this 3-part series. And there was a specific reason for that. Here at Lawlytic, we see it that social media is really a supplementary aspect of your law firm's web presence. And so often we see attorneys really obsessing over it or spending time signing up for every social media platform there is, or accidentally using it in ways that can undermine the work that they're doing elsewhere on the web. So we're talking about it now. And the reason for that is if you're joining us for this webinar, it should be at the point at which you've really got the foundation of your law firm's website in place in terms of developing and publishing content on a regular basis. So if social media is supplementary to your law firm's web presence, then why do you need it? And that's something that we're going to discuss in just a moment, as well as discussing which social media sites are the most beneficial for attorneys, because not all of them confer the same advantage, or in some cases any real advantage at all. We're also going to talk about using social media effectively. And I think once you understand what social media is meant to do in terms of your web presence, this is going to make a lot of sense to you. So why do bankruptcy attorneys need social media? Social media presence can be valuable for law firms in general. There was a piece that came out in Forbes not too long ago that suggests that employers who may be doing some background research on their employees may be suspicious of those who don't have a Facebook simply because of the normalization of social media presence. As that applies to your law firm, because of the ubiquity of social media and how often we use it, people may feel suspicious or just frustrated with you if you don't have a social media presence. So in an age where so many things revolve around the internet, no matter what device we're consuming content from, tech abandonment can raise some red flags for potential clients. They expect to find you in the places where they're looking, whether that's on your website or blog, whether that's being able to interact with you on Facebook, or maybe recommending you to somebody else on Twitter. And one of the best ways to promote the content on your law firm's website is through social media. So when you're done writing a piece, you can let your followers on social media know it's there. And this is a good way to drive traffic back to your law firm's website. While some of your potential clients may find you through search engines, promoting your work on social media can help your work get some additional exposure as well in a way that's easily shareable with others. So which social media do you need? Before I get into anything too specific, I think it's important to note that attorneys should exercise some discretion when they're choosing their social media. It's not a good use of your time or your effort to indiscriminately fill out profiles on every social media site that there is. In the same way that there are tons of online directories that attorneys can choose from, that doesn't mean that you should fill out every profile that you can. For example, something like Yelp or Avvo can be much more useful than some of the other directories. And the goal here is that you want to choose something that is useful for both you and also for your potential clients. And the same goes for social media. You don't want to choose just any social medium or choose all of them, or choose the ones that aren't particularly useful to your potential clients. You want to choose the ones where you'll expect to find your potential clients and where they also expect to find you. Now, if you do take the other route of indiscriminately choosing social media, what tends to happen is this. You tend to spread your messaging way too thin and ultimately dilute your message to your potential clients. And that's why it's a much better choice to select the right ones, the essential ones right off the bat, than it is to just put yourself out there and sort of hope for the best. And if you've been joining us on our webinars for a while, this message shouldn't be too surprising to you. At Lawlytic, of course, we are very much advocates of strategy and strategic thinking when it comes to any aspect of your law firm's web presence, because that's how you avoid wasting time and wasting money on strategies that you may only later discover don't work. So in sum, there are a ton of social media sites out there, and it's about striking that balance between having absolutely no web presence, which can be a turnoff for potential clients, and on the other hand, being present absolutely everywhere, from Facebook to Snapchat to Instagram, because that strategy isn't a good use of your time and your efforts, and it's also a strategy that is unlikely to produce the kind of results that you're looking for as a bankruptcy attorney. There are just some platforms that are more useful than others. So let's talk about the big three that we think are a good place for attorneys to start. So first is Facebook, and it shouldn't be too surprising that this one makes the list. Facebook, of course, boasts about 1 billion users and is such an ingrained part of our existence now that, much like Google, there are people who use Facebook as a verb. Social media is an increasingly normal part of our lives, and so much so that we want other aspects of our web activity to be combined with it. And this has really become evident in that while some people, myself included, still go to, say, like a news aggregate like Google News to find out what's happening in the world, a lot of people still use Facebook. And Facebook's approach to the news may reveal something about this. So we know that 66% of American adults use Facebook, and 41% of those get their news from that social media site. And that's regardless of gender, race, age, or education level. So we know that more people are getting their news from social media than ever before. And yet, when these people are polled, these people say that they don't consider Facebook to be a quote unquote important news source. So interestingly, it appears that Facebook users aren't actively seeking out the news. Of those who do read news on Facebook, about a fifth of them say that they think of Facebook as a useful place to get news, and 78% say that they stumble upon the news while using Facebook for non-news related reasons. So as one of the participants in this particular Pew Research study put it, I believe Facebook is a good way to find out news without actually looking for it. So this is a good opportunity for you to capitalize on this by sharing information through this particular medium. Now, there may be a question that some of you have, and that's this. Do I need a Facebook business page? Do I need a personal page? And the answer to that can be both. There are drawbacks and benefits to each one. So, for example, if you use a business page, you can reach people outside of your basic friend circle. The drawback to that, however, is to do that, you may have to spend some money promoting posts, and that may or may not be a good use of your advertising budget. It just depends. And this is something that our CEO, Dan Jaffe, discussed in a webinar from last week on pay-per-click marketing, and that's now available to view over on the Lawlytic website if you want to go see it. So next up we have Twitter. So what makes Twitter so great is that not only are you limited to those 140 characters, but the brevity of those posts are often what makes them so popular. People don't like sifting through tons of information to get to what they want to read. And not only that, but people tend to also love little nuggets of information. With Twitter, just by virtue of the fact that your post length is limited, you have to get right to the point. So Twitter is a great way to reach potential clients and also for referral sources. Say somebody posts a relevant question, somebody else may tag you and say, hey, get in touch with this attorney. Really, it can be that easy in a lot of cases. Here is what I find most interesting, and I wrote a blog post about this a little while back. So for my basketball fans, if you've been keeping up with the news, you'll know that basketball star Stephen Curry is getting his very own social media platform. But that's not the most interesting part. It's sort of about how he got there. So Curry at that time had an okay Twitter following about a year ago or 2 years ago, but he had an injury that ultimately kept him off the court. And what he started doing in his spare time is he started interacting quite heavily with his Twitter followers. The result of that is that he ended up amassing this extraordinary number of followers, about 4.5 million, I think. And there were so many that he was struggling to keep up with them, and thus the need for his own social media platform that was going to allow him to sift through all those tweets. But the lesson here is in the value of using social media. Twitter in particular is good for this, to have often real-time discussions with your potential clients and your referral sources. There's that expression I mentioned in the first part of this series that says that people won't care about what you know until they know how much you care. And this is a great place to exercise that philosophy. And in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit more about having discussions on the web. So the last social medium on this list is LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is maybe a little bit different from these first two in that it can be quite valuable for you, but in a way that's different from Facebook and Twitter. LinkedIn is particularly valuable for peer-to-peer referrals and networking. It is a great place to showcase your online resume, and sharing information there can bolster your thought leadership. You can publish blog posts to LinkedIn as well, and that's outside of publishing links to your pieces that are featured on your law firm's website. And that can be a nice way to link back to many other pieces on your site as well. If you are going to do that, I do caution you that make sure that you have a solid content foundation on your own site first before you start blogging on LinkedIn and contributing there as well. So my point is that not all law firms are the same, but based on how useful a social medium is to both attorneys and potential clients, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn are three great places to start. Just as there are many online legal directories, not all of them are going to be equally beneficial to attorneys. Each platform has its own culture and has its own guidelines. Of course, as I said, Twitter promotes brevity at 140 characters. LinkedIn is best for peer-to-peer referrals. So consider how you want to use the platform in question and what benefit it may provide your law firm and your potential clients before you decide to sign up. So the right social media platforms, when they're used wisely, can help to drive traffic to your law firm's website and blog. So if I haven't said it enough yet, be selective about the sites that you choose. You can use platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to promote your recent blog posts that you've written and things like that. But a question that might come up is, do you have to write a new blog post as your status update on Facebook? The answer to that is no, not at all. In fact, when you use social media the right way, the goal is to really expend a minimum amount of effort to promote your work. And if you have good technology to assist you in this effort, that's really helpful too. So instead of copying and pasting the text of your blog into a new post on Facebook or something like that, what you should do instead is link to the original blog post. Don't forget to write a catchy title or status update and add a relevant picture to increase engagement. If you're short on time, using a system like Lawlytic, which allows you to update all of your relevant social media in just a couple clicks, can help you promote your work quickly. In the first part of this series, I briefly discussed the idea that a lack of engagement with content, and whether that's, you're not adding new evergreen content to your site on a regular basis, or you're not blogging often enough, these sorts of things can signal disinterest to potential clients who are looking at your web presence. And in the same way, it's important to stay engaged on social media as well. So promoting your blogs on social media can help drive traffic to your website. But what it can also do is help others who are on social media share your message from within that platform, which should hopefully drive even more traffic to your site. So by writing pieces that provide useful information, especially when that information is new or surprising or shocking, what you do is that you increase the likelihood that such a piece is going to be shared by others who find it relevant to their interests or know somebody who may find that interesting. Where shareable pieces are concerned, you may want to try creating and sharing things like infographics on your law firm's social media. Infographics inherently provide a lot of information without having to commit to a lengthy read, and that makes them ideal for sharing online. Again, if you are going to do infographics and things like that, make sure that your text content foundation is really established before you start delving into things like infographics or video or audio or things like that. So promoting your blog posts is a good way to increase your visibility, but social media is also a good place to generate discussions and interest in your work outside of your blog's comment section. Social media is not a one-way street, and in order to increase interactions with your potential clients and your referral sources, it's important to think about your own interactions too. So you can use your social media to ask questions, to create polls, and gather information that can help you write better blogs that even better answer your potential clients' questions. So tagging others in posts and tweets can also improve your networking and heighten your visibility. Now, I say here, generate discussions where appropriate. And it's a topic that I want to bring up because sometimes generating discussions can go a little bit awry. Here are some things that you may want to avoid. For example, opinions about certain things can be beneficial to your business. So, for example, an immigration attorney might have the ability to take a strong political stance in that they may not care about alienating one side. Or if you're very pro-business and you only represent insurance companies against liability, clients want to know that you believe in the same things that they do. But say for a general DUI attorney, for example, it might be dangerous for them to take a strong political stance. So before you post a status update, before you tweet something, ask yourself, if I say this to somebody, will all of my potential clients be comfortable with it? Another thing to mention is that a lot of attorneys may choose to vent about their clients on social media. This can be dangerous in that assume whatever you say is part of the permanent record and that there is an easy method of comparing it against everything else that you've ever said, both in terms of content and consistency. Screenshots really do last forever. In my next slide, I'm going to bring that up. So my next slide concerns controlling your marketing. If you're thinking about hiring somebody to broadcast on social media who isn't a lawyer and doesn't understand legal ethics, there is some risk involved in that. So the average social media expert may not know what words can or can't be used and may not understand legal ethics. And as a result, there are all kinds of dangers that can cause you a lot of headaches as an attorney. So if you're not controlling your social media in your firm, or you don't have somebody who understands all of the needs of your firm and understands legal ethics, then what happens usually is that the potential upside of having somebody to handle your social media for you is far outweighed by the real and potential downside of the problems that can be caused by having a non-lawyer handle your social media presence. So whether you are participating in social media, in online legal directories, or anywhere else on the web, your focus should stay on the marketing that you own and that you control. So, as I've said, social media can be a helpful supplementary tool, but it's important for attorneys to focus their efforts on their own law firm's blog and website, as well as on other marketing that you own, things like email newsletters. Social media can help you attract potential clients from places other than search engines, but to keep their attention, you'll want to provide them with the most relevant and useful information that answers the questions that they have. Not only is social media something that you can easily do yourself, particularly if you're a Lawlytics member, you know how easy it is to integrate your social media accounts with us, but also for the fact that it's something that you should do yourself. Don't go delegating your tweets or your Facebook posts to a non-lawyer. Now, having a designated social media intern can be tempting if you think it's going to reduce some sort of workload that you have, but it's also something that can get you into a lot of trouble. Take Twitter, for example. You have a max of 140 characters. What's the worst that could theoretically happen? As it turns out, the answer to that is a lot, actually. There was a famous case from, I think, last year, really about how one bad tweet can ruin your life. There was a woman who I won't mention by name who was a PR executive about to go on vacation, and she made a few off-color jokes in a tweet and then turned off her phone and hopped on a plane to her vacation destination. And at this time, she had maybe 200 followers on Twitter. No big deal, right? While this lady was in the air with her phone off, unable to recognize what she'd done or even apologize for it, her tweets started getting a ton of attention, and not the good kind. There was a writer who had said, Twitter disasters are the quickest source of outrage, and outrage is traffic. And I thought that was sort of appropriate here. This woman at that time didn't have a huge following before, but now she did, and really for all the wrong reasons. She even ended up with her own hashtag as people, I kid you not, tracked her flight across the Atlantic. And much in the way that many of these stories unfortunately end, several hours later, she'd become part of this social media disaster that got her fired from her job. And in fact, if you look up her name today on Google, basically all you can find about her is in regard to this incident. So her entire career effectively snuffed out in a couple tweets. Now, back to how this applies to you. Clearly, this woman made her own major faux pas, and naturally we would caution you against that. But hiring an intern or a manager or any non-lawyer really can cost you big in this way. So one last thing I want to bring up is just mentioning briefly Lawlytic's social media features. So with the attorney in mind, we've really created a system that makes it as easy as possible for you to publish things to your social media account without cutting into your productivity or anything like that. So as you can see here, it's really easy to associate any of the social media accounts that you want to connect to your Lawlytics membership. It's really easy to announce blog posts. As you can see here, all you have to do is click that little blue checkbox there that says announce to social media. Type in whatever sort of status update you want to accompany your blog post, and then you can see here underneath, all you have to do is click on the social media accounts that you want to post to. You can choose all of them, you can choose just some of them. It's really up to you. We give you a lot of freedom to do what you want to do with your social media. And then once that's done, all you have to do is click publish and it's done. No need to hire a designated social media manager or intern or anything like that. So now that we've discussed social media, I want to go back to those metrics that matter that we were discussing in the beginning. So during my introduction, I had this slide up, and I noted that these are the metrics that provide a true north. And why is that? And the reason for that is this. If a marketing activity doesn't increase your firm's profits, then why are you doing it? We've heard too many lawyers say that they essentially work for, whatever marketing vendor it is. It used to be the Yellow Pages. Now it's some of the larger internet marketing companies. And unless an ego is in control of your law firm, bigger for the sake of bigger without a corresponding increase in profits isn't just vanity. It's also exhausting. For law firms who are already engaged in online marketing, we find that the easiest thing to do to increase their profits is by making what the firm already has work better. And by plugging the leaks and getting rid of the illusions and then reallocating the firm's investments of time and money into things that drive profits, it's oftentimes very easy to quickly increase the firm's marketing ROI, sometimes drastically. Increases in profits is the first step, and that's before moving on to an increase in revenue. And this maximizes the firm's returns over time because you start out optimizing rather than just going and going without having a direction. And that paves the way to exponential growth when it's time to start driving additional revenue. So once marketing profitability is dialed in and you're sure the ROI is there, then it's easy and predictable to throw more fuel on the fire. But the problem here is that this is where most lawyers get on the wrong track. In chasing growth, they start listening to the wrong voices, they start delegating to the wrong people and chasing the wrong metrics, and soon it starts to look like, as Dan had previously described it, a triathlete training for the Ironman on a cannoli diet. So the reason this example is brought up is that you can get a nice burst of energy from the sugar rush from eating a cannoli, but the success of your online marketing isn't a sprint, it's an endurance race. And a temporary increase in profits or revenue can actually be dangerous when it's not replicable. A little luck early on can set a firm quite far off course. And the worst thing that can happen to a firm is to have some success in their marketing and to not know why that is. So for that reason, number 3 in the list above here, as you see, is very, very important. You have to be able to increase your profits and revenue, but an important part of what should in fact be a scientific process to some degree is replicability, repeatability. It's really vital. If you cannot repeat what you did before, you're just placing blind bets at that point. So how do you know whether you are on the right track or if you're on the wrong track? Let's start by looking at some of the most common metrics that are used to measure the growth of a law firm's marketing. And these metrics, although they are common, are really empty calories. The list you see here, of course, is not exhaustive, and the purpose of this webinar isn't to go into detail about all of the ways that SEO and marketing speak can set your law firm's marketing on the wrong course, but by looking at a few of these, our hope is that it causes you to think critically about all the metrics that are presented to your law firm so that you can determine whether you're following a good map or whether you're following a bad one. So let's just look at a few of these for a moment. There are hundreds of different quote-unquote scores available that purport to grade the success or the potential of a website. And many of these scores, which oftentimes accompany like a report, are readily available for any marketing salesperson to buy and white label and pass it off as a marketing tool to say, look, here's what's wrong with your website. And it works with lawyers because lawyers are used to getting pretty good grades. So when attorneys find out that they're getting a C minus or a D plus or even an A minus, it makes them uneasy. But without all of the information about your firm, about your practice, about your client base, your referral base, your marketing dynamics, the external forces that drive public awareness and consumer behavior, things like the economy, things like that, without having access to the actual intelligence about the actual business that interacts with your law firm's website, these reports can simply amount to random numbers, even if they're produced by some sort of algorithm. So not only can they be completely inaccurate, they can really send you in the wrong direction and divert your attention from what matters. So when it comes to online legal marketing, as far as we're concerned, the only algorithms that matter are Google's, and there is no amount of SEO doublespeak that can render a score on a report useful. So to put this into perspective for a second, think about Avvo ratings. So if you're not already, nodding your head in agreement, visit avvo.com and look up some lawyers in your area that you know are amongst the best and compare their scores to lawyers that you know are maybe not the best. And what you're going to see is that on Avvo's 1 to 10 scale, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see some really good lawyers who have really mediocre or bad ratings. And you're also going to see some mediocre lawyers with perfect or near perfect ratings. So what I'm getting at here is that these marketing reports provide about the same amount of actionable intelligence as simply going and trusting those Avvo ratings provides to an average consumer who doesn't delve any deeper beyond that 1 to 10 score. So SEO salespeople have an interest in distracting you from your bottom line. And they do this using terms like, as you see here, hits, clicks, visits, things like that frequently. But these metrics are not necessarily related to increasing profits and revenue. And sometimes, in fact, they prove to be erosive of profits. It doesn't matter to you as a bankruptcy attorney how many tattoo enthusiasts, sports fans, or teenagers hit, click, or visit your site, right? They're not your audience. And this goes for metrics like Facebook likes and Twitter follows as well. To argue that these metrics matter would be similar to arguing for the admission of hearsay evidence. So in context, they could be relevant, but it's incumbent upon you to hold yourself accountable for the discipline of properly qualifying them in the context of the ROI that they produce. So one more, and that is rank. Rank is another one of those red herrings. There are a lot of marketers who try to entice attorneys on focusing on, getting to the quote-unquote top of Google. And if you were present for the first part of this 3-part series, you may remember me talking about why the top of Google is really nonsense. And if you didn't, go back and check that out. You may find that interesting. But many attorneys who spend and strive to get to that mythical place arrive where they thought they wanted to go and then subsequently discover that it doesn't support an increase in profits or revenue or repeatability. So when you focus on profits and revenue and replicability, and you break free of the SEO doublespeak and the tools of deception, your efforts are going to start to transform your law firm's website into an appreciating asset that not only generates perpetual business for your law firm now with minimal additional expense or effort or complaint, but it also transforms your website into an asset that has intrinsic value. So at Lawlytic, we have customers who have ignored those red herrings. They have avoided the cannoli diet, and they followed our content-based strategies. And they've ultimately built these multi-million-dollar per year revenue-generating engines. Their websites continue to feed them while they are practicing. And not only that, but when they retire from law or switch gears into something else, these sites can be sold for quite a profit in some cases, which ultimately will provide a retirement or a healthy annuity for you as an attorney or your family. And I know if Dan were here right now, he'd tell you that this is the case because he in fact did this for himself. So, growth risks. The brutal truth is that creating online success is simple, but it takes hard work. And most of the risk comes from the choices that you make. So let's talk about those for a minute. The first is misguided efforts. That saying of garbage in, garbage out also applies to your website. The more that you do the wrong things, the more that those things are going to amplify your problems. And if you're not measuring and you don't know that these things are causing those problems, by the time you do get around to measuring it, there is a good chance that you are going to have such a mess that it becomes almost impossible to do. Deficient execution is another problem. Lawyers who become wildly successful do not dabble. They learn how it works, and they form the healthy habit of repeating what works over and over again. Now, it may not be quick, but overall, when you look at ROI over time, and the wealth that these attorneys are able to accumulate versus attorneys who just sort of chase one thing to the next, the lawyers who don't dabble come out way ahead. The lawyers who fail at online marketing fail because they do a little bit of something and then they give up, or they get distracted by the latest SEO salespeople that send them an email or call their office or what have you. Intake systems. Sometimes lawyers really snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. They do everything right in their marketing, but they neglect the next portion of the revenue journey. And the most common thing that we see is that they fail to have something like an adequate intake system set up in their office. And this goes from, or for anything from having the right person or people answering the telephone in your office to having follow-up protocols so that potential clients that are inclined to hire you do so, and so on. Bad targeting. So most marketers don't understand how different the business dynamics of different practice areas can be. So if you're a bankruptcy attorney with a social media campaign that targets Instagram and Pinterest, or if you're focused on more than just a passing effort on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, as far as getting your message out there, then you're very likely barking up the wrong tree. People don't necessarily go to social media looking for that sort of thing. And as I've said, there's a place for social media. But if you're focusing on a social media strategy to the exclusion of doing some solid content strategy on your law firm's website and blog, where people actually go to find answers, there's a good chance you're spinning your wheels. And same thing goes for if you're trying to target keywords like bankruptcy lawyer. To do so, you're going to pay a lot for that phrase, or spend a lot of effort, or both. And it's hard to optimize for because it's so general. And the end result is that you're going to get a minimal return that you constantly have to fight to maintain. And if you want to know more about that and you missed the first part of this 3-part series, I do recommend that you go and check that out over on the Lawlytics website. We do talk about long tail searches in depth and things like that. Lastly is the idea of the unsupportable market. So it seems very basic, but we have seen lawyers try to squeeze more business out of markets than those markets support, sort of like squeezing juice out of an already done orange. So, and I preface this by saying I'm, not a bankruptcy attorney, but maybe you have something like, choosing a very narrow focus, maybe only focusing on Chapter 7 rather than focusing on things that might be a better revenue generator. It just depends, but it's really essential to know your total addressable market and optimize your marketing for that reality. I want to spend just a moment on some concluding thoughts here. So, for an attorney who really wants to dive deep into the subject of SEO, we've got plenty of resources over at the Lawlytics website in terms of blog posts and webinars that go much deeper into the topic. But despite the high volume of information that's out there, what we do want to tell you is that success is not complicated. And in fact, contrary to what a lot of SEO snake oil salesmen will tell you, SEO is not hard, and you can really learn everything that you need to know in just a couple hours. Doing SEO the right way really boils down to content. Your content is the lifeblood of your website success, and without it, nothing else can ever or will ever produce lasting results for your firm. And although we've said it many times before, it does bear repeating. Write for the audience that leads to increased profits and revenue. Write for your potential clients, for your referral sources, and the people who influence them. 99% of sound SEO strategy is simply saying no to what 99% of SEO salespeople are asking you to buy. And if you want to know more about that, there is a particularly comprehensive page over at Lawlytics. You can see the URL here. It's www.lawlytics.com/SEO. Go check that out if you're curious to know, really about the ins and outs of SEO and how that can affect your firm. Just a couple last points here. I want to bring up reputation management real quickly. The internet is the first impression that nearly all of your potential clients get of you and of your firm. So it's important not to ignore your reputation. Even if you have a potential client who is referred to you, they will interact with your web presence before they make contact with you. So it's really important that you tend to your reputation, which includes getting reviews online, knowing how to display those reviews well, and ultimately, if you have them, dealing with negative reviews. And at some point, you may have to deal with a negative one. And we recommend that you start thinking about reviews before that ever happens. We do have a reputation management add-on to Lawlytics, and if you're listening and you're a Lawlytics member, we're pleased to be able to provide you with Bird Eye Reputation Management, which is one of the leading reputation management platforms at a greatly reduced price as an add-on to your membership, rather than what you would pay retail if you went directly through them. We want to provide it to you at cost because we realize how important it is to get those positive reviews and deal with anything negative if it does come along. It's really crucial to plan ahead. We did a webinar a few weeks back on that topic, and we recommend checking that out or checking out the link that you see here to learn more about reputation management. And if you're not a Lawlytics member, we can also provide Bird Eye to you. You just wouldn't get as big a discount as you would as a Lawlytics member. But if you are interested, drop us a line and let us know, and we can walk you through it. Local marketing. So local marketing ties in quite closely to reputation management, so that's why we bring it up. It's important to claim and consolidate and maintain your local listings. However, contrary to a lot of what salespeople will tell you, you should not be paying somebody to do this for you, unless in the unusual situation where maybe you have many office locations. If you are a single office, or even if you have a couple locations, this is going to take 10 to 20 minutes of your time to get your locations in order, and really little to no maintenance afterward. And again, if you are a Lawlytics member and you're confused about this, we are happy to walk you through it. Another aspect of this is local content targeting. And Rachel talked about this a bit in these webinars, and we have other webinars that are local focused as well. But it's really easy to use the local marketing features in Lawlytics to target people at a local level. And there are a lot of ways that you can bridge into various local locations, whether that's on the county or state level, or even more drilled down than that. And if you're a Lawlytics member and you want some help thinking about that, let us know, and we're happy to help you out with that. The next topic that I want to bring up is paid online attorney ads. So again, we did a webinar a few weeks ago, and we recommend that you check that out. And what the purpose of that webinar is to trace the money trail of PPC marketing and really show you how the money is made, and oftentimes how it's lost for attorneys. The bottom line is that PPC advertising, while it can provide a boost and a bridge for certain practice areas, it's a trap in many respects, and it leaves attorneys dependent on a bid marketplace. So it's not a good, sound, long-term business strategy, because it's impossible to predict what your costs are going to be if you do it. So If you do decide to do PPC, it is incumbent upon your firm to have an exit strategy, meaning that if you have a way, meaning that you do have a way to survive marketing wise if, all of a sudden you wake up and you're bid out of the marketplace. So go check out that webinar if you haven't seen it yet. Lastly, let's talk about your firm's online infrastructure. The thing that we see happening when attorneys start getting a lot of success with Lawlytic is this. So the more clients they bring in, the more they need to prepare downstream to handle all of those clients. And that includes things like intake or case management, billing, and so on. So as you enter this grow phase of your law firm's marketing, it's really important for you to start thinking ahead. What kind of intake systems are you going to need? How is that going to look? And if you go to lawlytics.com/integrations, we do have a list of some of the technologies that Lawlytic works well with. Typically, the next step for lawyers as they get busy using Lawlytic for their marketing is to then utilize an intake system that will help capture and follow up with leads, and even get contracts and retainer agreements signed for new leads. And one that we really like working with is Lexicata. We integrate natively with that program to push leads from Lawlytic into Lexicata. And the next step after that is usually a case management system. And one of the most popular ones that's out there is Clio, and we do again provide native integration with that as well. So you can push leads from Lawlytic to Clio or from Lawlytic to Lexicata and then to Clio, and either way you can add these things on later. But again, it's important to think about how your practice is going to deal with additional business, because we've had lawyers join Lawlytic and then double their business and then run into that situation where they have too many leads that they can even handle. And we've had attorneys come to us and say, can you take our phone number off of our site and just leave sort of the online submission form there, because we're just getting too many phone calls. So it's important to think about that technology and how you're going to integrate that as you grow. So in summation, growing a law firm's web presence isn't rocket science, but what it does take is time and effort. So when you focus on the right things and you form these healthy habits around doing them consistently, and when you avoid SEO snake oil and dependence on pay-per-click, and when you have your reputation management in place and your local listings are claimed, what happens is growth. And if you haven't seen the first webinar in this series about starting a bankruptcy law website, there are a lot of foundational elements that can help you get started on the right track. If you're already well on your way to growing, I hope that today's webinar provided some useful information and the inspiration to stay focused on repeating and refining what works, and of course removing or changing what isn't working. Next month, we hope you'll join us for the final webinar in this series, which will talk about how to take a steadily growing law firm website and to make it a truly dominant market force. I want to thank Sophia and Rachel for their presentations today. Dan will be back with us next week. And for all of you who attended this webinar, I hope it helped, and we hope to see you again soon. And with that, let's go to questions.